Good morning, good afternoon, good day to all, and welcome to the CGIAR seminar series on building food system resilience. My name is Roula Majdalani. I am a climate advisor at ICARDA, CGIAR, and I have the honor to moderate today's webinar on post-COP28 priorities for advancing food system transformation. The webinar will delve into the main takeaways from COP28 led by UAE. It will reflect on key challenges and priorities expected in COP29 for different countries and different regions, how Azerbaijan presidency will lead the process, and how Brazil is gearing to ensure a smooth continuity across the COP28, 29, and COP30 in 2025. Before I turn to the distinguished speakers, let me remind you of that we are, first of all, we are so excited to hear from you and to participate in our question and answer session. Please submit your questions on ifpri.org, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or by using hashtag AskIFPRI on Twitter. Without further ado, let me turn to our distinguished panelists who will lead us through this process. So let me invite Ms. Felicitas Röhrig. She is a Senior Policy Officer at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, and BMZ is a co-organizer of this webinar series. Felicitas, the floor is yours, and you have about 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Roula. Well, dear ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to also extend a warm welcome to all of you as we embark on this next webinar of the BMZ CGIAR policy seminar series on building food systems resilience. And first of all, my thanks also goes to the co-organizers of IFPRI and the CGIAR for hosting this webinar series. The CGIAR has been a leader in delivering critical science and innovation to transform our agriculture and food systems for over 50 years. And as one of its founding members and biggest donors, Germany is proud to celebrate this year its 50th anniversary of funding the CGIAR. We are convinced that the CGIAR plays a critical role in refining practice and policy responses for the transformation of our agri-food systems. And we want to use this webinar series to shed light on some of the key questions that arise in this context. Now, turning to today's topic of post-COP28 priorities, I think that last year was instrumental to foster the further political integration of climate change and agriculture and food systems. The COP28 Emirates Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture, Resilient Food Systems and Climate Action created a great political momentum and was a critical step towards bringing the required attention of the climate community to the agriculture and food system space. We at BMZ, we welcome very much the Technical Cooperation Collaborative as an implementing body to realize the Emirates Declaration and to support countries to implement its various goals and recommendations, because it is clear that with little time left for realizing the international commitments for a sustainable future, we must now walk the talk and put evidence-based knowledge into action. Now, there were a multitude of other climate and food systems related initiatives that were discussed, created and launched at COP28, all of which shows the great political achievements of increasing global attention to agriculture and food systems and their role in addressing the climate crisis. However, we need to acknowledge that once again, the formal negotiations of COP28 under the UNFCCC's Sharm el-Sheikh joint work on implementation of climate action on agriculture and food security have concluded without reaching an agreement. Since the Sharm el-Sheikh joint work builds on the landmark Coronivia joint work on agriculture and is the only sectoral negotiation body under the UNFCCC, we must work to make it succeed and be a functional contribution to climate action. In the end, it's the formal negotiations what delivers binding agreements and where we need to see more progress, especially if we want to attract more international and climate finance to the agriculture and food sector. So I want to ask this question today. How can we make sure that all the successful outcomes of COP28 support the further formal integration anchoring of agriculture and food systems in the negotiation processes and frameworks under the UNFCCC? How can we achieve binding agreements that allow to attract and direct more climate finance to implement the various solutions that food systems transformation clearly provides to the global climate and also the biodiversity crises? And with these questions, I'm happy to leave the floor to the expert panelists and very much look forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicitas, and it's really an honor to be working with you, and thank you for the trust of BMZ in the cooperation with CGIAR and in highlighting the food agenda. Let me now turn to Aditi Mukerji. Aditi is the Director of Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation Impact Action Platform at CGIAR. And Aditi, you have the floor in leading us through the main takeaways from the stocktake of COP28.
Thank you so much, Roula, and it's a great pleasure and an honor to be in this session. And I want to share, I have just one slide, if that can be put up. Yes, the next one, please. Yes, that's the only slide I have. And actually, Felicitas has covered pretty much all of these. I want to take two perspectives to this. One is to provide an update of what happened at COP28 in Dubai vis-a-vis the agri-food sector. But given that CGIAR, our core competence is doing research for development, I also wanted to say a few sentences about what is the research that we can do to make sure that these decisions that came from the COP28 are better informed, that these are science-based decisions. The first one is, of course, it was literally a COP that focused on agri-food system. And we know traditionally COPs have been more about the energy sector and much less about agri-food. So we think that COP28 really changed the direction in that way by focusing on this sector, which accounts for 33% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, through the UAE Declaration on Agriculture and Food, which has now been signed by 159 countries, which essentially says that all of these countries should raise their ambition ambition vis-a-vis climate action in agriculture and have those ambition embedded in their national adaptation plan and nationally declared NDCs. So I think what it does is, as the countries go ahead and update their ambition, improve their ambition, the opportunity for all of us who work in this research for development space is that we literally look at the new versus the old NDCs and see how much of the ambition has actually been raised. So currently, if you add up all the ambition, put in all the NDCs vis-a-vis the mitigation part, we are still leading to almost from a 2.4 to 3.1 degree world by the end of the century. And we all know that's a world that's too warm. That's a world that's too warm, particularly for the global south, where we work, particularly for our sector, because a lot of the agriculture would simply collapse under such high temperatures in many parts of the global south. So a big opportunity is to keep the pressure up, to do review of those NDCs and NAPs and see how much of that ambition is actually reflected in those documents. The second very encouraging one, and actually the presidency had dealt with it very nicely. Right on the day one, there was an announcement around loss and damage fund, which was opened. I mean, so I think that was a momentous development in this COP, and that fund started to be funded as well. Obviously, the funds that were put in and are still being done are a minuscule portion of what is exactly needed for loss and damage. But in terms of, again, the research that we can do is, it is well known among most of us and the listeners also, that much of the loss and damage is actually happening in the agri-food sector, because this is the sector that is most weather exposed, most climate exposed. I mean, no other sector is as climate exposed as this sector. So how does that funding mechanism actually help compensate or actually help mitigate some of these losses and damages that are happening? How do we quantify those? I think that's a big research question. How do we bring in attribution science combined with all other sources of information that's available and quantify these losses and damages? And that would really help going forward. The third positive development that happened and was the text around global goals on adaptation. And in that global goals on adaptation text, there were particular sectoral targets around water, food, ecosystems, biodiversity, and those are all the spaces where CGIAR works on. And some of the wording of the agri-foods of the agriculture related targets and goals were also very close to some of the wordings that we have used in some of our submissions. So that was a good outcome from the agri-food system perspective. Here again, I think the important part is that because there has not been a quantified goal, or because there has been lack of indicators and targets for adaptation, adaptation as a whole has been very, very underfunded. We all know that less than 10% of the climate funds actually goes into the adaptation space, and even lesser to the smallholder farmers. So there is a lot of work that will happen in the coming 2 years around, as we go around finalizing those targets. And this is again, CGIAR stands ready to work with all the parties and all the observer organizations to help feed in the research that we are doing around adaptation metrics and targets into this process. The fourth one, as I think Felicitas said, is indeed the disappointing part in conclusive discussions around the Sharm el-Sheikh joint work on agriculture. And and now it will be again taken up.
Aditi, can we
I have just one
wrap
more.
up, Aditi?
Yes, I will wrap up. Thank you, Roula. So with this, we will again meet in SB in Bonn later this year. But here, the major concern from the Global South is really if mitigation would compromise food security, because a lot of the literature kind of indicates that. So here, actually working on technologies that can achieve both the mitigation goal without compromising food security, bringing those forward would be critical. And finally, is what became very, very apparent was the huge funding gap that exists in the food systems transformation, which I know speakers after me are talking about. Thank you, Roula, and back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Aditi. Thank you also always opening up the door for an optimistic look on what science, innovation, change in the food system transformation. Let me now turn to Chris Hamel, who is the head of food systems, the Presidency, UAE. We had the honor to work with Chris all of last year, and Chris is also a climate change special envoy. The floor is yours, Chris.
Roula, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. My name is Chris Hamel. I'm the head of the food systems team for the COP28 presidency. The first way to start this segment, I think, is just with a note of thanks and gratitude to this community that worked tirelessly for about 18 months to achieve the result that we heard presented with two colleagues previously. It was quite a lift, and it was a lift that was informed by massive amounts of consultation and coordination. And I don't think it would have been possible without that sustained effort. And I think it's a reason that there was sort of a landmark moment around food at COP28, and that's because we all agreed to come together in that way and to unify, which was very much the theme of our leadership, to try to find some common way forward. So I just wanted quickly to talk about the declaration. 159 not only countries, but heads of state. So I'm not sure if in the food domain, apart from the establishment of FAO back in the day, and maybe some responses to some crises that have come along the way, if there's ever been such a moment where heads of state themselves have come together around a text in the food space to fully endorse it at this level. So 159, we're hoping still for 160 or more over the course of this year. But even so, this represents about 80% of the production of all the food we eat. It's 80% of all the food or all the emissions coming from the agri-food system. So this is 25% of all emissions covered under the scope of this declaration. And of course, we had some maybe we're hoping transformative even statements in the declaration about heads of state recognizing the need for agriculture and food systems to adapt and transform in order to respond to the imperatives of climate change. So explicitly linking the climate movement and climate agenda with the agriculture and food systems transformation agenda. So I can say from our side, we were really pleased to have been able to play the maybe conductor role and bring this to life. And we've heard nothing but wonderful feedback from our leadership internally about how happy they are with the result and the expectations that they have throughout our presidency year to help continue to shepherd this through. And I think this speaks to Felicitas's point earlier. We've had this great result, and now the question is, what's to be done about it? Maybe I'll just speak to that briefly, a few elements from the UAE's point of view about this coming together over our presidency year period, all the way up to Baku and beyond. So in addition to the political statement, you might remember that there was an action agenda for regenerative agriculture that was launched at COP28. This was essentially involving agribusinesses and working in partnership with farmers organizations and some development partners, essentially sharing data. That was the big accomplishment out of that partnership to date. So we actually have sort of a clearinghouse or a shared database that's handled by a third party to essentially invite and encourage large agribusiness players to submit their investment plans and projects that are regenerative focused with respect to their sourcing of materials in different landscapes. So we can actually have a sense and kind of geolocate the amount of investment happening in specific places and different contexts to support specific value chains. That's a new stream of information that we've never had before, and it will help to make commitments around investment that agribusiness has also made at COP28 to have a little bit more transparency and accountability and hopefully open the scope up to others joining in COP29 and COP30. Specifically, what UAE is hoping to do to try to move this agenda forward. First, you may remember that we launched the UAE Gates Partnership for Food Systems, Agriculture, Innovation, and Climate Action. This involved, as one element, the UAE actually joining the CGIAR. So we're quite proud to have been able to deliver this as a historic moment. The UAE being the first donor from this region to join the CGIAR and support it. I'm happy to say we've had some kickoff workshops now to establish how the partnership will evolve going forward. But that is, I think, our breakthrough that will help push the CGIAR agenda forward in the climate space and also make sure that there's alignment with the CGIAR's work and the declaration's political efficacy. So that's one thing. The second element is we announced this concept of the Technical Cooperation Collaborative during the first day of the first summit, COP28. The idea here is to work with the main suppliers of technical assistance and funders of technical assistance in the domain of agriculture and food systems, and essentially ask them to coordinate a bit better and to identify gaps in funding so that we can make sure that any country that wants to implement the declaration and is ready to do so can find some of the TA funding it might need to do that. And the last thing I'll say, Roula, is that through the Gates partnership, we're actually trying to unite these two worlds. So we'll be making some contributions to different CGIAR TA platforms and products, including via some IFPRI work, to be able to respond to country needs to implement the declaration in support of the Technical Cooperation Collaborative. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristofer. and it's really good to see how much you have covered grounds through the declaration and to see you carrying it forward. Before we turn to another section of our webinar today, I just want to remind you that we would like to hear from you. So if you can post your questions on ifpri.org, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or by using hashtag AskIFPRI on Twitter. Now, COP29 has been dubbed as the Finance COP. Let us see how, to what extent that will be, we will be able to turn this into a reality. On this section, I am honored to have two leading experts who will be telling us about the challenges and opportunities for climate finance. Let me start with Geeta Sethi, who is advisor and global lead for food systems at the World Bank. Geeta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And what a pleasure to be here and all of the star-studded panel. But more importantly, I'm excited to be on this panel, on this session with the rock star, Swinnen. I think it's very nicely laid out, the food systems transformation. But once again, as Aditi mentioned, let me remind us that we are at a path of 3.2 degrees, according to IPCC report. However, we can still achieve a world of 2 degrees or less, as long as food systems transformation is part of this agenda. But for this to happen, we really need to rethink how food is being financed. Today, the financing is exactly one of the reasons why we have a bankrupt planet and unhealthy people. And yet the system has to change, not just to feed who are already here, but also get ready for a table of 10 billion or more in the next 2 decades. This transition, again, is a big number of close to 500 billion a year for the next decade. But what I want to argue today is that this is doable, particularly given that COP29 and COP30 both are around the corner. It's doable because of, let me list 7 sources of financing that could be available for this transformation. Some of them have been touched upon already, so I will go over them very quickly. First, of course, is the domestic financing, which Yo will talk more in detail, but it's about 680 billion a year, and it is this financing in part that causes over 12 trillion in hidden costs, which creates what we are seeing today in terms of emission, biodiversity losses, adaptation gaps, etc. So there's a very, very strong argument to be made on the repurposing of this public support in a way where farmers are in the front line and can move their production towards sustainable and nutritious food. Second is improving the quality of private finance. Farming, agriculture is a private sector activity. And today, the financing and spending is north of $2 trillion, private finance and spending. And this can go a long way to foster the transformation we are looking at. But the sobering reality is that the large number of upstream agri-food companies have not put together a comprehensive sustainability targets. So that this is very important if you're looking towards a public-private partnership to really improve the quality of financing, but also to really bring about this transition. Third is climate finance, and I think Chris alluded to this as well. Today, the agri-food system receives 3 to 4% of climate finance, which is about 25 billion a year. Of a total of 660 billion of climate finance going in the sector, emissions are 1/3. So at least 200 billion a year is a good scale to work with. But for this to happen, as Felicitas already mentioned, negotiations need to look very different and be very conclusive if we really need to get climate finance coming to match the emissions that this sector is contributing today. And so it puts a different kind of relevance and pressure and on COP29, given that it's a finance COP. Fourth is the fragmentation of ODA. The food sector gets about 10 billion of financing in terms of ODA, and the medium size is about $500,000, 500,000. This makes transaction heavy and inefficient. We can easily think about moving to a more sector-wide co-financing model, and there are some good examples to go that way. Fifth, and Aditi talked about this in detail, is the upcoming loss and damage financing, but really tailoring it in a way that food sector or agri-food sector is very much present and eligible for financing. The losses because of climate impact between 2000 and 2022 averaged about 23% in terms of the total losses caused to disasters. Droughts is about 65% of losses. And over the last 3 decades, $4 trillion have been lost in terms of crops and livestock, but really translating into the losses of incomes for farmers. So clearly there's a very, very strong case, and we need to keep pushing as a community to really be part of this conversation to ensure that funds are allocated and activities can be financed. The sixth source of financing is poverty lines. Today, in many countries, poverty lines are largely driven by caloric sufficiency. And this means that almost $1 trillion of global spending on social support programs and income, social protection programs and income support programs are not nutrition sensitive. So there's a huge opportunity to improve nutritional outcomes by having nutritionally informed poverty lines, and therefore redirecting or almost repurposing the public support going into towards social protection programs, etc. And doing this has a very strong gender angle, because it's largely women and children that become affected and are hardest hit by food and nutrition insecurity. And finally, the seventh, which is a conversation that's been ongoing, and we are very much supporting this, is targeting debt relief. Many countries that are highly food insecure are also highly indebted. And to the extent that debt swaps is part of this toolkit, there is a very strong case to be made for debt for food, of course, within certain kinds of G20 common framework, country systems, and a very, very strong governance. So money can be tracked and outcomes can be defined. But the resulting improvements
can you wrap up, please?
In food and nutrition security will definitely help in reducing childhood stunting. So, which is really, there's a permanency argument in terms of really creating permanent human capital by addressing food and nutrition security through debt for food swaps. But more importantly, as large number of debt is in non-Paris Club, with non-Paris Club members, there is a very strong reputational and moral risk that private sector will definitely support this, because it makes them look awful if they're not going to be improving children welfare. So clearly there is no lack of money, but really thinking very seriously about repurposing. And with that, my co-panelist and Rockstar, over to you, Yo. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Geeta. And I'm happy that you will be building on that. Yo Swinnen is Managing Director of Systems Transformation at CGIAR and the Director General of IFPRI.
Thank you very much, Roula. And thank you very much. A big thanks first to BMZ for sponsoring this seminar series, which I think as a series has been truly innovative and come up with very good seminars and great insights on a number of issues related to the overall theme. And also thanks very much for IFPRI and the CGIAR for putting together such a wonderful program today and in the previous times. Geeta talked before me. It's kind of a blessing to come after her, and a bit less of a blessing because she covered so many of the topics already. So I have prepared some slides, but I'll skip some of them, which she has covered already. Geeta Sethi of the World Bank has been very instrumental during the Food Systems Summit in terms of bringing on ideas, being a leading thinker, and also following up in the years afterwards today. And she's working on a number of very innovative ideas to turn those into practice and to enhance basically the financing of the food system transformation as we are talking about today. I have about 4 different themes, and I'll touch briefly on each of them. One is on the repurposing issues, then on technology financing, on value chain, the role of value chains, and on social protection. And Geeta, as I mentioned already, covered several of these things, so I'll be a bit longer on some and a bit shorter on others. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a summary of which we made as part of the Food Systems Summit finance lever discussions, structuring it. Actually, Geeta has not only summarized them, she's expanded on them. So I'm just going to skip this one. So there is as she explained, well, there's a private and a public component, or basically set of flows. There are international and domestic flows. Next slide, please. Now, one of them has to do with is a set of public expenditures, which is there already. So this is not something we have to look for. At this point, somewhere between 700 and 800 billion, depending on the year and fluctuation of world market prices, are currently spent on agricultural subsidies globally. And so, as she explained already, I mean, a lot of these subsidies are not contributing to health. In fact, they are detrimental to health. They are not contributing to resilience or sustainability. In fact, they do the opposite. And so they do it the true way. And so the interesting part of the subsidy is that they are affecting both the incentives of people who are receiving them to behave in a certain way. And of course, they also are a potential source for investment in key areas that need investments, particularly public investments, I would say. So there's 4 important. So one is there's a lot of money there. 800 billion is by any standard a large amount. Second one, it is already there, so we don't have to look for it anymore for new things. Third, the spending is very uneven across countries. Actually, if you look at China, the EU, and the US, that's a big chunk of it. But also in developing countries and other countries, public spending in this type of funding is actually quite large in terms of relative compared to what they spend. For example, I was just in East Africa, and there in some of the countries, about 50 to 60% of public expenditures go to fertilizer subsidy. The same thing in countries like Nepal and some of the South Asian countries. So it's important there as well. Next slide, please. We have done a number of analyses over the past years together with colleagues from the World Bank, FAO, OECD, etc. And these come to fairly consistent conclusions. So at this point, there is only a relatively small part of it goes to public goods. I already mentioned this. Next slide, please. And so, but if we look at different scenarios, just removing them is actually not doing the job. What is doing the job is if we repurpose them, if we use the subsidies in different ways, we have different criteria for allocating them, spend them on different things. And you see that it is possible under certain conditions, certain policy criteria, that you create win-win-wins, meaning it's good for the climate, it is good for biodiversity, it's good for nutrition, and it is also, if we do it well, not harming the farm sector for which they are currently mostly targeted to. Now, these are based on large-scale analysis, large-scale simulations. Next slide. In a very interesting exercise, which was actually led by Aditi Mukerji, who is on the panel here today, and Lorraine Ronke from the World Bank. They looked at very specific technological innovations and what is needed in terms of finance to make this happen. So these are the 7 technologies that they looked through, the breakthrough technologies, reduced emission from fertilizer, alternative proteins, etc. You can see them there. And a key recommendation throughout this report is we should redirect public funding to reduce the cost of the technologies and both through investment and to changing incentives and to making markets function through investments in credit schemes, insurance schemes, infrastructure, etc. Next slide, please. Here is I just put it in as an example. This is from the one of them, which is the livestock methane emissions reductions. And so they have come up with very specific recommendations for these. And then they've linked that to R&D investments, to public policy spending, and a number of other things that need to happen to make it work. So it's a really fantastic report. I really encourage you to take a look at it to see how we can turn this big, basically policy advice into very specific things for these specific innovations. Next slide, please. If we look at this point at where we are, okay, particularly on the R, this is information on R&D globally and in Africa, then we see that globally we had kind of an increase very significantly between 2000 until roughly 2013, 2014. And since then, we have either a leveling off or a decline even, depending on the data that you look. But it's not, this is really not the direction we should be going. And if we look at Africa, for example, we see that the spending there as a share of ag GDP, and there the target is 1 or 2%, depending on the advisory that you get. But even at the 1% level, by far, almost all the countries are actually below it, and certainly below the 2% level. So there's work to be done. And again, this can be done from domestic and international sources. Next slide, please. I just listed a number of examples of, so people often say, well, there's not much happening there. It's very difficult. It's politically challenged, etc. But there's a lot of things going on in the world. And so here you see examples from Bangladesh, from Vietnam, China, Australia, Mexico, also countries in Africa. And so these are all examples of repurposing of existing subsidies or new investments that are taking place, supporting climate change and nutrition, and a number of other resilience investments, for example. So these are all well documented, and we can provide details on these if you are interested in them. Next slide, please. I just put this in. This is based from an OECD report I think is very interesting, where they actually make the case that we should not look at these reforms and financial innovation in isolation. They should be part of a broader climate reform strategies and a coherent. And so this relates to environmental regulations, emissions pricing instruments, etc., and then the ag subsidy repurposing and the R&D investments there. Okay, I have not one more slide, I think. Next slide. So this is about value chain. Yeah, I'll make the final point here, and I think here the key point is the following. So only 3% of global climate finance goes to agriculture. Okay. But agriculture, if you look at it from a food system perspective, is only 30 to 40% globally, and even in maybe not in the poorest countries, okay, but in the lower middle income countries and upper middle income countries, the rest of the value chains makes up to around basically 60% or something. And so that means that targeting the rest of the value chain as an instrument, as a mechanism to let finance flow into agriculture is something we have to work on much more. Particularly because these companies they are typically larger, they have easier access to finance, they are much larger, so the fragmentation problem in terms of for financing is less an issue there. And we know from current work, work we've done for the last 20 years on studying value chain financing in terms of using larger companies, in terms of getting finance to smallholders, etc., is really a potentially very powerful instrument. And I think we should use this much more than we've done so far, particularly if we can link it, and which is important obviously here, with objectives of basically climate change objectives, sustainability criteria, etc., going forward. My fourth point related to the role of social protection, etc., but Geeta has covered this already, so I can stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Johan. I think you and Geeta very nicely the opportunities. I think the challenge, how they can tap on these new mechanisms, new finance mechanisms, and maybe how the portfolio, the envelope of financing can be raised to address priorities. And now we will be looking at policies and priorities. Dr. Boaz Keizire, Head of Policy and Food Systems at AGRA, representing Dr. Agnes Kalibata, who is the President of AGRA and former Special Envoy of UN Secretary General on Food Systems.
Thank you so much, Roula, and I'm glad to be part of these discussions. It's very exciting to hear from what Swinnen is speaking has started, as well as Geeta, especially on really trying to trace and see the financing sprays of food systems going forward. Dr. Kalibata, as you all know, as a former special envoy on food systems for the UN Secretary General, was and continues to be very, very passionate on what it looks like to really transform the commitments, the pathways, the game-changing ideas. How do they begin to look like at the country level? And I think Africa brings a huge example as an opportunity, picking it from the Africa's common position on food systems that was established at the time, and beginning to really to translate that in the country. And one of the biggest advantages that we have been able to do and work with the institution, the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, is to develop continental-wide guidelines on how countries should interpret food systems and embed it and integrate them in their national plans. That's a very, very key intervention, because countries were struggling to understand what does this mean to really bring food system in the country. And therefore, the guidelines have been very, very instrumental. And they're also drawing from excellent work of the UAE presidency on including the climate, the Emirates Declaration, that people like Chris were able to lead and be able to really see some of the tangible outcomes coming through. But if you want to take it to country level, I think it's very, very important to see the countries that are leading. We've consistently mentioned that Africa, and with the push and the guidance from Agnes Kalibata, we needed to really help countries to design what we call food system-centric strategies and investment plans. There were initial pushbacks on developing a food system strategy. How would that begin to look at against the national strategy that are already in place, like the agriculture investment plans, the national adaptation plans, the health sector strategic plans? But it was important to demonstrate on a sector-wide food system strategy and investment plan with clear examples of business cases. And countries like Rwanda, Malawi, Ghana were really the food soldiers. They started this off, and we are beginning to see the change. And one of the best examples, and I'm actually seated in a remote hotel in Nyagatare in Kigali, Rwanda, really as part of the work that yesterday we launched the Africa Food Systems Forum that's going to be taking place in September. But I think Rwanda is demonstrating as a first country that is showcasing others the progress on integrating food systems in the national plan. Most of you are maybe aware that Rwanda has been revising their PSTF5, the Plan for Revitalization of Agriculture. And you will notice that for the first time on the continent, we're having a country that has expanded the agriculture plan to be a broader food systems investment plan. And it's almost getting final, and it's going to be actually bringing different ministries and sectors together, and with the guidance of the leadership of the country for agriculture to be able to lead. I think that's a very good example to begin to tap into resources that countries are very aligned to food system thinking, integrating into the plan. The second country is Tanzania. Some of you may be aware that Tanzania has been revising its agricultural sector development strategy, SDP2, which was a 10-year plan. It had reached a mid-year plan, and the president of Tanzania called on institutions and governments to align and make sure that we integrate food systems. I'm glad to note that they are finalizing an SDP2 replanning, which integrates food systems and be able to guide resources flow into different sectors, multi-year sector plans to guide investments, including all partner investments. So these are some of the good examples. Burkina Faso, Kenya are coming on board, really begin to integrate their food systems in national adaptation plans, national agriculture investment plans, multi-sector plans, and really sort out the coordination issues. And I must say that at the COP28, as some of you are aware, that the Green Climate Fund was able to announce a $70 million that is going to integrate in some of the 7 countries to help investment that speak to how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions using post-harvest losses and post-harvest waste. Excellent examples coming on board. And my last comment, Roula, is how does this come together? I am very much aware that institutions like FAO, the World Bank, IFPRI, and many others, the CGIAR, have committed to a technical collaborative initiative, cooperation initiative that Chris and Geeta talked about. I think we need to rally our efforts to make sure that we are coming to countries to demonstrate a collaborative effort to support countries in designing food system strategies, food system plans, because only then, and using financing and money as an instrument, will foster coordination, alignment, and harmonization, but also making sure that our investments are food system centric, and then we are able to use tools that are able to track how these food systems are going. So it's really great to see that countries have taken a bold step to take this forward, and Agnes Kalibata is excited to see that there are countries that are leading in that space, and will be able to see that financing instruments are following these models and be able to take them forward. I want to thank you for being part of this seminar, and we'll really continue to make sure that countries are taking the lead and showcase at this level. Back to you, Roula.
Thank you. Thank you, Boaz, because there are a number of questions addressed to you on Africa. Let me now turn to Qingfeng's Senior Director for Agriculture, Food, Nature, and Rural Development Sector at the Asian Development Bank. The floor is yours.
Yeah, Roula, thank you so much. Thanks to CGI and also the IFPRI invite the Asian Development Bank to attend this very, very important panel. I'm going to use as a few slides to discuss about the challenges facing with the Asia Pacific, and then also discuss about the actions taken by the IDB. And more importantly, I also want to examine the options, work together with the other IFIs and at the same time with the CGI centers, and of course with the IFPRI. Next slide. So again, Asia Pacific is facing the triple crisis. Namely is the climate change, biodiversity loss, and also food insecurity. Again, Asia Pacific is experiencing disproportionately high socio-economic costs from climate change, with the impacts anticipated to be twice the global average by the 2050. In this slide, you can see floods in the Pakistan, heat waves in India, and also droughts the Central Asia, and also the Yangtze River of the China, and also glacier break outburst in Himalaya. All of them a key reminder of consequences in terms of the loss of the livelihood and also increasing risk of the food insecurity. Next slide. Again, another challenge in this region is facing is a significant degradation of ecosystem, also biodiversity. Asia Pacific has been one of the most biodiverse regions in the world, but many ecosystems in this region, from the tropical forests to their coral reefs, have been degraded beyond their repair. COVID-19 could be just a tip of the iceberg of a pandemic due to the destruction of the nature and also ecosystem. Biodiversity loss, of course, is a reduced capacity of the ecosystem to adapt to the climate change, leading to the exacerbation of climate change and the further decline food security. Next slide. This slide show in Asia Pacific, when we say the 2024, international food prices already come down a little bit, but global rice prices started to surge. It started last year. Rice prices, particularly in Asia, increases close to the 40% between December 2022 to the January 2024. Largely due to the export restrictions by the India and many other countries. This is also due to the heat wave and also the climate change. Again, if this region going to increase the rice farming, and also if farming practices are not really so sustainable, they're going to also increase the GHG emissions significantly in Asia Pacific and contribute to the global warming. Next slide. So with this triple crisis in 2022, December, ADB announced as a comprehensive food security program. worth $40 billion over 2022 and 2025, with a balance between addressing the immediate crisis and, of course, is support this long-term resilience, particularly build up this long-term security, food security, reduce the impact of the climate change and also biodiversity loss. I'm very happy to share up to the end of the last year, ADB already delivered $7.7 billion commitment of the food security. And then for the next 2 years, we still have the $6.2 billion to deliver. More than 50% of the food security program is to contribute to our climate financing, and also the climate private sector investment come for the closer to 25% of the total food security investment. Next slide. So again, with a picture of a COP28 declaration of a sustainable agricultural resilient food system and also climate actions, ADB deliberately designed our program to address the climate food natural access, particularly focus on the climate smart agriculture, and then digitalization of agricultural value chain, and also the enhanced investment of the natural capital and also the food system resilience. Next slide. One of the key initiatives I want to share here is ADB established the innovative natural capital financing facility, includes 3 key components. The first one is a natural capital lab. Again, is related to the what you and the other colleague talking about the repurposing agricultural subsidy from the ADB, and we are more focused on how we can have upstream the natural capital assessment, and also introduce a accounting mechanism. More importantly, in exam, there's an opportunity to shift the agricultural subsidy towards the payment for ecological services, and also they help the country introduce the eco compensation regulations and also provide the training. This is one of the key component of this innovative natural capital financing, and also we already engaged the 13 countries to conduct this upstream natural capital assessment. Second component is a natural capital fund. We already secure some seed money from the global environmental facility and also the global agricultural food security program. Gatsby. Yeah.
Could you wrap up, Qingfeng? Could you shorten?
Yeah. So I just
again, the conclusion, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I only have the one more slide. This natural capital fund is basically to support the secure co-financing to support this eco compensation fund and also the payment for ecological services, leverage with the FI's investment. Agribusiness platform basically is leverages the digital technology and also support the agricultural value chain. Last slide. Next slide. This is my last slide. Very important. Again, we recognize food system transformation requires a very strong partnership, not only just FIs, but also with the CGIAR Center, IFPRI, and many others. So this February, ADB together with the US Treasury and also Stanford University, we organize this FI Global Forum. Basically, we agree 4 things: coordinate efforts among the world FIs. 2 is a climate food natural access is the key. And we also need to adopt the cross-sector approach. And thirdly, the partnership need to be more holistic. One of the key agreement is we're going to operationalize the innovations introduced by the CGIAR Center. And again, next month, April 9 to 12, ADB is going to host the Asia Pacific Food Security Forum. We're going to invite all the CGIAR centers to ADB in Manila, and we're also going to further examine the possible options for the cooperation between the FIs and the CGIAR Center. Thank you so much, Roula. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Qingfeng. And I'm sorry to rush you, but just to leave a little bit of time for the Q&A. And now we get into the preparations. Where are we at COP in terms of COP but also COP30 and that very interesting agreement that has happened between COP28, COP29, COP30, known as the Troika. And we have the pleasure to have with us Ms. Nigar Arpadarai, who is the UN Climate Change High-Level Champion for COP29 in Azerbaijan. And she is a member of Parliament of the Republic of Azerbaijan. And we wish her the best of luck in this big challenging but rewarding endeavor. The floor is yours, Nigar.
Thank you very much, Ms. Roula. It's my pleasure to join this distinguished assembly of this distinguished panelists. And in my role as UN Climate Change High-Level Champion, together with Her Excellency Razan Al Mubarak, as representatives of COP29 and COP28 presidencies, is to bridge between non-state actors and the governments. That means catalyzing action, showcasing solutions, and amplifying the diverse contributions of non-state actors, from cities, civil society, philanthropy, finance, and businesses, to farmers, indigenous people, women, and youth. By articulating the opportunity for partnerships, for innovation, and for capital flows, we can give confidence to governments to adopt ambitious policies. COP28 has put firmly food systems on the climate agenda. There was a strong commitment to action to transform food systems from governments and non-state actors. There were a number of pledges done, and the roadmap and various initiatives were also launched. Countries joined, non-state actors endorsed call to action for transforming food systems for people, nature, and climate, etc. While these are all significant achievements, what matters now is to demonstrate how the delivery and action against these pledges by COP29, COP30, and beyond will be taking place. We are facing certain challenges with food systems, facing unprecedented and accelerating challenges, including climate impacts, nature loss, land and soil degradation. Food insecurity is rising, obviously, and we need to show how it's possible to create solutions that deliver for people, for nature, for climate. It is heartening to see many businesses, regions, civil society groups, and communities all around the world already contributing to such proof points around agroecological production, healthy, sustainable diets, reducing food loss and waste, and protecting and restoring nature. And also in his speech, Mr. Swinnen had also mentioned some case studies from governments, which was very good to see. It's critical for governments to create the enabling conditions to accelerate action by non-state actors, including introducing supportive policies and regulations that create market and trade conditions to level the playing field for sustainable and healthy foods. Ladies and gentlemen, the agriculture breakthrough in the breakthrough agenda sets out the actions governments can take to strengthen international collaboration to reduce emissions and transform food systems, including standards and regulations, finance, technical assistance, and market creations. And huge thanks, I would like to thank CGIAR team who authorized the agriculture chapter in the last year's breakthrough agenda report. We need to put the needs of frontline food systems actors and other vulnerable communities at the center of our efforts. This means designing processes that are inclusive and offer meaningful engagement. This means providing appropriate support during transition processes and leveraging the change process by address systematic social and economic inequalities. This means solutions that are context-specific, that work for food producers, bottom line, as well as for climate and nature, building on the knowledge and experience of farmers, indigenous people, and local communities. And we're working on scaling actions to ensure resilient, just, and equitable food systems through the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda. Well, dear colleagues, there are lots of things that needs to be done, and from finance point of view also, which was mentioned before in the speeches, catalyzing private sector finance through blended finance models that the risk private and capital investment, etc. So we are calling for all of this in the food systems call to action, and we are working with a diverse range of non-state actors to accelerate and demonstrate delivery in the build-up to COP28. COP29. And the call to action remains open to endorsers. I encourage you to join and also join initiatives like Race to Zero, Race to Resilience campaigns. And also speaking about the our region, the region that I come from, in addition to all these challenges, we also have in the last years, there have been a serious interruptions in global and regional logistics network, which also is very important to mention. It led to the fact that international trade is shrinking in the last couple of years, and we are yet to access and understand the implications of it for the food safety. And we are living in a globalization time, and during these years, the interdependence of countries on each other have been increasing, and now with this trade and logistic interruptions shouldn't be happening. Also, in our part of the world, there's another problem, which is the water issue, which should also be mentioned in our region. Our region falls into the category of countries that falls under the pressure from water point of view, and we feel this pressure every year. So there are things that should be addressed from that perspective also. Well, the subject is very broad, and I'm thanking the organizers for inviting me to join this seminar. And I'm sure that the dialogue and the platform for dialogue, for discussion, is very important. So once again, thank you very much for having me, and I'm looking forward to welcoming everybody in Baku this year for COP29 and collaborating with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nigar. We really appreciate that you joined us even in spite of your busy time. As our executive managing director said, that we, as CGIAR, we stand ready to support the presidency in in achieving those big and very ambitious agenda that you have set for yourself. And thank you. Nigar has to leave us, unfortunately, but you may also follow her and send her questions on LinkedIn. I'm sure she will be happy to respond. Let me now turn, and as you said, as you know, there has been a troika in this process between COP28, 29, and COP30, but also looking for more coherence across COP processes, the CBD, the UNCCD. And now we would like to hear from the two speakers who will follow. Eduardo Brito Bastos will be about the readiness of Brazil to host COP30, and then Juan Lucas Restrepo will be guiding us with an overview of this process, with what will be happening in Latin America, but also on the CBD process. So I will start with Eduardo. Eduardo is agronomic engineer and chairman of Climate Connection and chairman of Innovation Board. Is yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here. As I'm sure that most of you know, we have in Brazil something slightly different from most of the countries in the Northern Hemisphere, that something around 70% of our emissions come from AFOLU, 50% almost from deforestation, 25% from agriculture. So it is not possible to talk about carbon, climate, and food, separated. So must be combined, and that's exactly the challenge that we have ahead. So how can we help keep increasing the production, but at the same time stop the deforestation? So in our country, what we decided to do is to move in 4 pillars: science, regulations, projects, and funding. In the science side, we are working with USP, the University of São Paulo, and Exalc to build the CCarbon. I was elected as a chairman at CCarbon, but the leader, it's Professor Ado Sethi. Probably most of you know him. And so we are bringing 150 PhDs to that project. to bring more tropicalized protocols, because most of you, I'm sure that you know, though in tropical systems, most of the regulations were built by temperated crops, temperated soils, so not feasible for us. So the challenge is how can we tropicalize that, tropicalize the protocols, the MRVs, the emission factors, and also the capture, the sequestration factors, which still today, it's a huge challenge with the UN. So the main idea for this center is to be the biggest center for tropical agriculture in the world, to work in carbon. And you are more than invited to be on board. We already have more than 30 partners all over the world, and more than 30 in Brazil, including for sure Embrapa. The second pillar is regulation. We just created in January this year a carbon chamber inside the Ag Ministry. I was elected as a president, so I'm leading this carbon chamber. We have more than 150 different ag associations in that chamber. And the main idea inside this chamber is to work in taxonomy, to raise funds, but to guarantee that we are aligned to all over the world, and to move in the bill of law for carbon market, which is we are waiting to be approved by COP. So how can we include agriculture in the carbon market without including exactly this bill of law? So this is a challenge, quite the same thing all over the world. The third pillar is projects. The biggest project that we are running now is the national plan to recover degraded pasturelands. It's a 40 million hectares project to double the production in Brazil. So to run from 300 million tons to 600 million tons without deforestation. This is by far the biggest project that we are running in the country. And then the fourth pillar is fully related to the third one. It's funding. So we will need $120 billion only with OPEX to put that on the ground. So we are talking about $3,000 per hectare plus 40 million hectares, $120 billion. So this is a part of the challenge that we are moving. The main idea is to showcase all those good ideas, but in essence, I'm really want to reinforce the invitation to all of you to work with us in that project, specifically in the science side and the sea carbon. We are desperate needing more PhDs on board, more researchers, to guarantee that all the technology developed here can be replicated at least in all the tropical region of the globe that we understand as a traders. No, we are long in nature, long in food, and the North is short in nature, short in food. So why not get those parts of the world closer to guarantee that we will develop a much better society ahead of us. Thank you. Thanks so much for the opportunity, and here to help.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eduardo. Very interesting, and we are really looking forward to your engagement. I think this is really a precedent that you are already starting to prepare for COP30, and I think you will pave the ground for action beyond the action beyond commitments, not just commitments, but action on the ground. Let me now turn to Juan Lucas Restrepo, Global Director of Partnership and Advocacy, CGI and CGIAR Director General of the Alliance of Biodiversity and International and CIAT. And Juan Lucas, nice to see you. You are the last speaker, and probably you will reflect also on what you have heard so far, and how do you see the road ahead. The floor is yours, Juan Lucas.
Absolutely, Roula. It's good to be here. Thank you to IFPRI and to other CG colleagues for bringing together this great set of people and minds into how we're looking at scopes and priorities for advancing food systems transformation or food, land, and water systems transformation. And I want to take maybe an institutional approach from CGIAR into this matter. And I would like to start by saying that CGIAR has been in constant change for decades, but it's been accelerating in the past years into what we're calling now an integrated partnership, where instead of seeing a number of centers with a lot of tradition, a lot of knowledge, a lot of technologies, evidence, we are bringing more and more an integrated approach into science, to policy, advocacy, and how we respond also from our research and innovation capabilities. And this has been seen, and this is what I have personally witnessed in, for example, how we participated in the Glasgow and then Sharm and then Dubai COPs, and as we are more and more a cohesive partnership and facilitate, therefore, our engagement not only with the presidencies but with public and non-state actors as well. And this being also demonstrated in how we have been supporting the definition and the reporting on the breakthrough agenda setting, the FAST initiative, and then, of course, coming into the UAE COP that I will refer to in a minute. And this is something that we're doing not only in the Climate Convention, but also in the UNCBD, as well as UNCCD, still to a lower extent, but in UNCBD, how we felt very proud to see that the new global biodiversity framework agreed in COP16 in Kunming, Montreal, already has some elements, some wording, some ideas coming from CGIAR science, and how now in preparation for COP16 in Cali, Colombia, we are coming even closer as a system to be present and to support the parties into making sure those goals agreed in that framework are implementable. So going very quickly through what we've heard today, it's been, and we heard from Chris about the UAE declaration, where we gave some inputs. So we have some elements in there, but now we are more interested and committed to working as a supporting partner of what's called the Technical Cooperation Collaborative, and also as parties restart the processes such as the Sharm el-Sheikh processes, we keep supporting that as well. Also, from what we heard from Ms. Nigar, Arpadarai, what the priorities, and of course this is a continuum of the presidency is, and how water scarcity and the importance to scale action are critical elements, as well as how CG can come in to support, and we heard some of this from Joe Swinnen, how we can de-risk further private sector capital flows to support food, land, and water system transformation. And then, of course, as we heard from Eduardo, tropicalizing protocols and these very important targets that you got to double your production without deforestation are elements where, again, CGIAR has extensive work across the Global South and can support as part of this PhD collective and other ways of supporting the president's effort. So just to start maybe synthesizing a little bit, the way CG is engaging better in these processes is through evidence-based assessments, advice on key challenges and identification on potential solutions, technical guidance on food systems related initiatives, on finance, water, tech transfer, of course, capacity sharing, technical cooperation is critical. How we also advocate and support the alignment of the UK, Egypt, and UAE initiatives, the Breakthrough Agenda, FAST, the Technical Cooperation Collaborative, so they work together in a coordinated and cohesive manner. And then, of course, how we also, and we heard a bit this from Aditi, in our negotiation, we can support negotiations on the new collective quantified goal on climate finance or development on indicators for the global goal on adaptation. And also, as we've been doing, but doing this in a more systematic and proactive and thoughtful manner, our submissions to the UNFCCC calls, our participation in technical expert dialogues, how we help inform agendas in the climate regional weeks, and then, of course, how we allow and facilitate the connection between a global dialogue and what happens on the ground, which is where we have a lot of our evidence gathering and relationships. So just to finalize on a couple of things, the first is that as we engage better in a more organized manner in these processes, we CGIAR are improving systematically our understanding of country demands that can be translated into more relevant research for development interventions from our side. And this is why our programmatic framework 2025-2030 will better support food, land, and water systems transformation across the global south, and with a very important emphasis on the scaling and on ensuring that we don't reach a few hundred thousands, but really millions farmers and consumers across the board. And just to close, I would like to say that this is not CG, it's partnership. Partners at the global and local levels are absolutely critical. And a little example that we felt very proud about is this Food and Climate National Action Toolkit that was presented in COP28 is a product of a lot of CG knowledge, evidence on the ground, but of course, something the UAE Presidency, WWF, NDC Partnership, FAO, Global Alliance for the Future of Food and Climate Focus co-developed. So this is how we like to work in partnership with, for, and through partners. This would be it from me, Roula. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Juan Lucas. As always, you managed to capture the whole the spirit of the discussion and synthesize it, and also inform our dear audience about what the range of support and involvement and partnership that CG can offer in this process, and the long way that we have come through the COP process since the Glasgow and since food security has taken center stage. I tried to do time management as good as I could, but we have about 13 minutes left, and we have many questions, very interesting questions. So I'll go straight to the questions and address when they are addressed to specific people. Otherwise, but please, dear panelists, please feel free to come in and support if you would like to, even if it is not directly addressed to you. So I'll start with a question for Geeta and Aditi, or Aditi, you may want to complement it. Could you expand on the actual negotiations around agricultural food systems and their outlook moving forward? And probably, Aditi, you may want to also reflect on what is CGIAR view on the objectives for developing country when we talk about food system. Is it an adaptation story or a mitigation story? So let me start with Geeta, and then Aditi, you can follow. Geeta?
Thank you very much, Roula. And you actually did a fantastic job, time management, but also connecting the different speakers. Now, on the negotiators, I think Felicitas really put it very well. There is a declaration, as Chris said, with 159 countries, heads of state have signed. But we all know that the negotiation broke down at the COP at Dubai. And so this disconnect between what heads of state are saying and what negotiators are concluding needs to converge. And I think that's the bigger story than worrying about whether it's on adaptation or it's on mitigation, because both are going to be relevant to the food systems. The second is we talk about getting more climate finance into the sector, but the only way we can get climate finance in the sector if there's something that has been negotiated that begins to then allow climate finance to move in. So hence the relevance and the importance giving to the negotiation process as we are moving broadly into more than the narrative on how we achieve this transformation. So let me stop here and pass it to Aditi.
Thank you, Roula.
Thank you so much, Geeta. Aditi. Yeah,
Yes.
Go ahead, Aditi.
Yeah. So I think, again, I agree with Geeta. It isn't so much a either or question anymore. I mean, we also know that adaptation will not be effective at a warmer world. I mean, we recently had a paper that says effectiveness of adaptation shrinks considerably if we continue emitting greenhouse gases. So it's not an either or question now. It stopped being an either or question, say, 10 years or so ago. So we have to do both. We have to do both in tandem. But one of the concerns really is just does mitigation in the ag sector reduce or compromise food security? And I think that is where science plays an important role. And this is where we have to, CGIAR and other partners in the space have to actually demonstrate that there are those options where you can move to a low emissions pathway while not compromising food production or productivity, or you can actually change the food systems in ways that kind of provides multiple wins for climate, for biodiversity, but more importantly for health and nutrition, because our food systems are not fit to purpose. We know the huge health cost of the food systems. So there is a lot of evidence out there, and I think we need to make that very clear that it's not an either or question anymore, and technologies and processes are available that needs to be adopted, and finance would be key for that. Back to you.
Thank you, Aditi. Maybe I hope that Yo is still with us. Yo?
Yes.
Yes. Yo, there is a question directed to you. What is required to make repurposing a reality at a large scale?
Yeah, it's a very good question, a very important question, obviously, because we can come up with all the advice if you want. If it's not going to happen in reality, it's not very useful. Now, I think we should not be naive about this, right? It is not a trivial thing to do. A change in subsidy systems in general is difficult because there's always people, well, there are obviously people to whom the subsidies are targeted or who are benefited, who are not necessarily the target audience. And they will typically object to these changes. And so in higher income countries, these are typically farmers are benefiting from output and direct subsidies, and in lower income countries, mostly from input subsidies, including fertilizer subsidies. But it's not the farmers only, okay? There's a lot of stakeholders around them as a system who are also benefiting either directly or indirectly from those subsidies. For example, in Europe, a whole significant part of the subsidies ultimately ends up in higher land prices, benefiting landowners, etc. So, but at the same time, the stakes are huge. We really need to make this happen. So that means the fact that failure in a way is not an option. And I think what is needed is a number of things. One is part of what we need to do is come up with careful analysis, well identification of the benefits and the costs of these changes. And that can basically be used as an input in setting up a policy package where basically compensation schemes are there, basically putting together different types of policies so that those who may lose out from some of the subsidy things benefit in other ways by getting access to better technologies. For example, I mean, many farmers in developing countries are not using some of these technologies because either they have no access to finance, if they have it, it's too risky to do it. So if we can set up ways of dealing with these constraints, that will change their perspective on the changes that are needed as well. So I think we need to be smart but not naive in making this bring this forward and be part of the whole decision-making process.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Let me turn to Qingfeng. What are the key measurement challenges and best practices for eco compensation schemes?
Yeah, thank you so much. Roula, can you hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Yeah, so for the eco compensation, actually in the past, for the forest sector and the grassland sector is quite straightforward. Since we are easy to calculate the carbon reducing benefit. Let me see, can I turn the camera? Seems some issues with my camera. But again, one of the key changes is how we adopted the eco compensation with watershed services to reduce the water and soil erosion, because as it's very much dependent on the location of the farmers and also the scale, how we can scale up the watershed services. So that's why we helped a number of the key countries in Asia Pacific from the PRC and also the Vietnam and also Cambodia to introduce a landscape approach. We need to introduce this sort of a food system transformation along with this sort of river basins scheme. Have this integrated approach. So that's something right now we work together with a number of the key countries like the Mekong River, and also the in PRC is the Yangtze River and also Yale River. Now is with the Bangladesh, they are also try to replicate the type of the landscape model to scale up eco compensation and also payment for ecological services. Let me pause here. Thank you, Roula.
Thank you, Qingfeng. Let me. There is a question on Africa. Boaz, you are still there?
Yes, I'm still there.
Okay. How to reduce chemical fertilizer use in Africa despite government promotion, and how to maybe look at the way where you can really have a balance between sustainability and increasing production, and really having Africa as the breadbasket for the continent.
It's a very interesting question, and we've been trying really to discuss some of these. First of all, you cannot talk about reducing chemical fertilizer before you have actually estimated how much is Africa using in terms of fertilizer use. Obviously, we know during 2006, the Abuja Declaration announced that every farmer should be using, reaching 50 kilograms per hectare. Today, the average is 18 kilograms per hectare. And we are not, and in the face of food systems, Africa is not saying we will want to increase fertilizer use indiscriminately without being consideration of the climate change and climate effects. So that concern is there. But we need to be careful about how do you reduce fertilizer today, especially in the phase where you are having 2 kilograms per hectare from in terms of yield for maize and other crops, because we have not optimally utilized the balance between fertilizer and the good seed to be able to begin to be concerned about reducing. In any case, as Africa, we should be really trying to push for increasing the use of fertilizer, chemical fertilizer, but in a way that does not degrade the environment. Remember, most of the other countries in the north, in Europe and other in the United States of America, they use over 200 kilograms per hectare. In Africa, we are still at 18 kilograms per hectare. But again, that's not an argument that we should really be cognizant of ignoring the effects on the environment. We are beginning to develop models and approaches and technologies of how we can be able to optimize water use, reduce less synthetic fertilizer, be able to really integrate and make sure that we are able to measure the amount of carbon dioxide emissions, just modeled around what is happening in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Nicaragua, very good models. But the point we are making here is that we are cognizant of don't offer increased fertilizer use, but we are still much lower than what the West used to do. And we're not advancing to repeat the mistakes that the rest have done. No.
Sure.
So I think the point is optimize the existing use, be able to integrate climate change technologies, regenerative agriculture, adaptation mechanisms. So that we are going to be able to
Point well made. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question to Eduardo, and then leave the last question to Juan Lucas, if you bear with me. So Eduardo, very briefly, what is your position on the EU law on deforestation free value chains? Is this a helpful measure for curtailing deforestation? And very, very briefly, 1 minute, because we need to close. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I think that the one of the biggest challenges dividing the country in the north, 80% of the land belongs to the government. So it's much more about command control. So in the Amazon, this is the biggest issue. But if you think about Cerrado, 2/3 of deforestation is legal, which means that farmers cannot find a way to receive money from their biodiversity. And then for me, Restrepo mentioned something really, really key. It's the combining the efforts of the COP, the climate COP, and the biodiversity COP. If we can join those two to prove that it's possible to increase productivity and at the same time receive a reward for the area that they are protecting, if we can combine those two, we will do a very, very interesting job in such a large scale as the Global South.
Thank you. Sorry, I had a problem with the unmute. And as a wrap up, Juan Lucas, there was a question for Chris, but I think you would be best to address it. Chris has left, but you would be best to address it. How do we keep up the political momentum for COP29 and COP30? And then if you can also reflect in conclusion, what are some of the practical steps CGIAR can take to support climate investment, to mobilize donors, host country and private sector to support climate investment, and particularly maybe always need to think about the Global South for climate adaptation. Juan Lucas?
Yes, Roula, thanks a lot. And I know we don't have a lot of time, and your questions are absolutely comprehensive and complex. I would say, and let me focus just on the role of science, on the role of research, innovation, evidence to accomplish these elements. So one very quick example, we heard at Deputies of Agriculture G7 meeting yesterday, the representative from the African Union, saying that a lot of the transformation will not be financed and supported through ODA or traditional funding streams, but more from the private sector. 90% of the investment will come or needs to come from the private sector. And for that reason, we need to look at incentives. We need to look at how we repurpose those incentives, but how we also de-risk and provide enough evidence and assurance for private investment to put money in key places where data, risk management models, etc., facilitate those investments. We also need to be much better at pooling our intelligence. Our intelligence from science is still very fragmented. If we bring it together and we don't just interact with the private sector, with that pooled intelligence, or with the public sector, but we work in a triangular models where we are all at the table, the science, the policymakers, and the private sector. That's not how business is done at the moment. We have linear individual bilateral engagement, and we need to go into more triangular engagements, and that will, of course, increase understanding, acknowledgement, and will lead us to facilitate global leaders to commit while still being electable and good governors for their people, if I may put it in this very general manner.
Thank you, Juan Lucas. Yes, you can hear me. Yeah. Yeah, we come to the end of our session. I think it was a very, very enriching session. I wouldn't dare summarize it. I think there were so many good insights, probably converging a lot on the need for raising the envelope, looking at where are good opportunities for mobilizing resources, funding, but also looking at the adequacy of funding and their appropriateness, particularly when we deal with different contexts, and we're looking at the global south, and there has been acknowledgement that the funding that goes for adaptation, for food system and water is really so minimal compared to mitigation. Yet, as Aditi said, this is not an either or, but with co-benefits that we need to be looking at. I think there will be the session will be posted on the link. I would like to thank all of you, to thank BMZ, to thank IFPRI for organizing this wonderful session and for giving me the opportunity to moderate it. It was a big honor for me, a humbling process, and I would like to thank all the distinguished speakers who have really done a great job, informed us on so many important dimensions. These are difficult times, challenging times in terms of geopolitical situation, but also in terms of meeting the high ambition. People are coming together, stakeholders, countries, state and non-state actors, but still there is a lot to be made. And we look forward for seeing you again. Thank you, IFPRI. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Chris, Mabel, the support team. And I hope I didn't forget anyone, and especially the wonderful speakers. And have a very good evening.